All right, folks. Well, thanks for coming out. This is going to be a very informal presentation. It's probably better that way. It just feels more natural. I'm not going to blow this up at the moment, but this chart, which might have started out as a flow chart when I was thinking about how an AI, artificial intelligent machine, might be programmed. The thing about a flow chart is it starts at the top and you kind of flow down. But once I started thinking about it and how human consciousness might function, you could see that we arguably come onto this chart at locations down here. So it's not so much of a flow chart if I apply this to what I call the human everyday thinking. So you know that piece of the total package that you know what you're thinking and you know what stuff is up in your thinking. So that's the piece of what I call rational, logical human consciousness that this is meant to have an organizational chart for. But we're going to come back to that. Before we get into it, I want to take you through a little bit of death by PowerPoint here. So we'll start this. So there's the title. And I don't even know how good this title is going to work. This has just recently started, so I don't even know exactly what to call it. But again, we want to map out the human everyday thinking consciousness. So some things to consider. And we'll just kind of go through that. So the chart is really meant to be an organizational one, meant to show the typical data sets or information bundles that humans will make use of for their logical thinking in an everyday sense. So I think we already know that people will talk about you have a subconscious, you have emotions, feelings. So there's more to our total package than just saying, oh, I know what I'm thinking about right now. It's like, I'm not an expert in this, but psychology has already thrown these terms around. So we'll have a chart coming up. But the final chart we're heading towards, the data sets or information, those yellow boxes at the end of it, it's meant to be an information package that your everyday logical thinking runs with. Okay, so that's the idea of it. What that chart, in the end, what it does not show, because I ran into this problem, I thought is a type of human processor. But that's not what the chart shows. Okay, it maps out likely the information packages you have or the things you've considered that get tied up in your information package. So this isn't like the Commodore 64 from 1980 or whatever it was done versus an IBM of today's day and age. So it's not a human processor. The chart does not show exactly how the processors run or work. So a little assumptions are going to take place here. The type of human processor, I'm going to make a generic assumption that says, look, let's assume that we have a generic standard issue human processor that most people run. So that'll be one assumption. And in terms of how the processor works, at least the chart, everyday thinking, the assumption will be it'll run on percent certainty. We'll get to that. So a little bit about the presentation. And this probably says it better. It's only 14 days old. So what we have here is literally a grouping of ideas. And I'm looking at this earlier today saying it's not the ideas that are 14 days old. It's how we've grouped them. And we are not at a point where this is a model that we've seasoned and we're confident with it. So the purpose is this is going to be a starting point to evolve the grouping of ideas into something that becomes more useful. And I did write a book. Doesn't really feel like I wrote it, but it's called The Rise of Reason Through Understanding. The unfortunate problem with this book, it's 125 pages. You've got a lot of pages about philosophical considerations, scientific ones. So if you have all of the classic philosophical big items, you've got right, wrong, is there a God, existence, causation, that's a lot, and it's only 125 pages long. So I'm not really sure what it is you're writing. When people have dedicated free will, for instance, there's many philosophical writers that have entire books about that topic. And then you've got the scientific considerations, quantum mechanics, etc. So it's almost like it just comes out and it's blah. So how do we understand the content? So this is the first of 2 to 3 presentations that I'll put on a website to try and help that out. So that's the idea. This is the sketch. So now we're getting closer. When I say total human consciousness, and as I sometimes have the habit, typical human, and you've got a little bit of long hair, short hair, trying to say male or female, we're sort of the same in this sense. So this is the total human conscious package. And whether you're in psychology, I don't know the exact terms, but we all know we have emotions, instincts, feelings, spiritual stuff that's somehow encapsulated in there for some people. Subconscious. This everyday thinking consciousness, this is precisely the piece that the chart at the end is meant to map out. So I'm not discounting that all the other things are still players on the field, so to speak, for the total package. So what's the pot? The pot is a very ugly drawing. Think of it as each of these things have a vote, if you will, or a tally that goes into the pot. And in any given situation, the weight that one of these holds weighs in heavier in the pot for the next thing you observe the person doing. So if you're having everyday thinking with your accountant setting up a business and everything's going great, outdoor cafe and a bear starts coming to attack you, I'm pretty sure that the next likely outcome might be heavily weighted from the contribution of instincts. Like, I don't think we're going to be sitting there thinking, oh, okay, a bear, I'm just attacking, I'll do this. But when you get back to being able to have the time and space to do it, you can start functioning where this weighs very heavily and what goes into the pot and comes out. So that's all that this is meant to show. Okay, key points before we get to the chart. Percent certainty. This is, in the chart, how the majority of humans, I'm assuming, will make choices. This is very important. If they're in the everyday conscious thinking mode. So just like you're having a conversation with setting up a business and everything that you do is directly related to what you were thinking and how you were going to do it, there's a direct relation. Percent certainty doesn't really seem to hold a lot of weight when you're thinking in a very high emotional state or instinctual. It doesn't seem to fit as well. But when you're able to think and weigh out logical pieces of information, you can come to a situation where you say, I'm 90% sure I'm going to do this. I'm very confident. If you're dead 50-50, then you might say, I might as well just flip a coin in the choice that I'm going to make because if the deadline's coming. So that's what percent certainty is meant to pertain to in the chart. Superficial choice, when you're following through this chart or trying to navigate through it, it's not the same as when you genuinely consider the choice in depth. So what do I mean by superficial choice? I've had acquaintances in the past that when you bring up one of the higher fundamental questions in the chart, God or causation or something like that, I've had some of them immediately, almost like reading a dog tag, will kind of roll their eyes, oh, not this again, and they'll say something like, I believe in God, there's a purpose, I don't know what it is, and I'm comfortable living the life I live. So if you do a little bit of a biometric analysis, a lot of them honestly have not went up into it and genuinely dedicated time and effort to considering those questions. So I'm calling that, when it applies, a superficial choice. So you might have an answer, you think or sound like you're confident, but that's not the same thing as genuinely spending the time and effort to get into those bigger questions. The next point. Assume animals have passed on to us most of the total conscious package, but the everyday thinking belongs to humans. So what this is really trying to point out is this concept of some type of evolution taking place. And what we look at is in this case, the biological system in front of us. What are the capabilities of it compared to the previous, what biologists might say are jumps? You have a single cell, you got multicellular mammals, and then here comes humans. Subconscious. The animals, I mean, do they seem to have to think about their heart beating just like we do? So it's almost like subconscious is running in the background coding. They seem to have it. You can even see in meerkats or other animals, they seem to have emotions as well. We seem to have inherited that, but what this chart wants to show is the everyday thinking. I know what I'm thinking about it and what's up in there informationally. That seems to be something that we have and they don't. It's important to point out that evolution is something that will come back in the future presentations. Now we're almost at the chart. Belief. I underlined this. I'm going to treat the word of belief in relation to this chart especially when you are in that logical thinking mode. It's going to be treated as nothing more than a system, a human, coming to a very high percent certainty in a choice they made. That's all that the word means. But however, this point, it's kind of like ink blots, where they show you this ink blot and you're supposed to look at it and say what comes to mind. Well, you could do the same thing with simply saying a word. So, I mean, we tried this, and they said, okay, Mike, apple. And I said, green, trees, and spray. They said, well, are you talking about apples that aren't even ripe? I said, well, I mean, I have like the green apple candy, the sour apples. If I'm in a store, I like the green apples. They're ripe. The spray and the trees, we have a mini orchard at home, 20 trees. It's very small, but it's a lot of work when you see the row of trees of the apples and the spray for the Roundup or the treatment. So that's the word association with apples. I'm fairly confident that in this world, if you say belief, the number out of the top 5 words ever said, the top 3, I guarantee you, are going to be related to things like this. What could be more fundamental in the world than, put an S on this, a group of beliefs from an information package associated with God, religion, or church? And this is precisely the associations I have myself, having been raised Catholic. This is not what it's intended. I'm not saying belief has to be directly related to religious aspects of an information package. At this point, once humans believe something, they often do not reconsider in depth the choice that was made, and they move on as if it's true. So an example of this would be jury duty. If you're on jury duty, and let's say it's a murder case, Bill's on trial, and you're in deliberations. And the first piece of evidence that comes up, let's say it's a videotape. And in the video, this guy walking in, it looks like Bill. So you go around the room and say, look, what do you guys think? Is this Bill in the video? The video's legitimate, it's been time-stamped, we know it's good, but is that Bill? So you look at other pieces of clothing he had, you make some correlations. In one frame as he's walking in the video, you actually see a mark on his arm. The mark you see, part of a tattoo that you know is on his arm. So you say, you know what, we're 100% sure this is Bill. So once they've deliberated for an hour looking at this piece of evidence, once they come to a consensus, it's almost as if after that, when they refer to the video, do you think they're going to take a full hour reconsidering how they made the choice? Or are they likely to move on as if what they were confident about, it is him? So when they say, we believe it's Bill, that's what it means. So the same thing happens to many things, and this is a matter of efficiency. Even a computer system, if it's been very confident about something in the past, why waste computing time having it reconsider it again? So there's an element to that. All right, so now we can move on to the chart, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow this up. I mean, obviously this is a very rough presentation. It's not polished. So I'm going to expand this. If it makes it to a website, you'll be able to follow along with a copy of it. The yellow boxes are essentially the endpoint of questions that can be considered. So the stuff that's not in yellow are important questions. It looks more like a flowchart style when we start here and head down through it, answering these questions as we go. Human systems, as I'll get to later, likely come onto the chart down here before they even do this. But we'll start from the top and I'll take you through. Now I have to admit, before making this chart, I went around, I asked a lot of people, what do you think is the single most fundamental important question that you could ask? And many of these types in the box, was there a beginning, was there an end, is there a God, randomness, determined, and the list goes on. Then after thinking about it, I said to them, well, what about the question, is this something? And a surprising number of them, their face, they didn't roll their eyes, but it was kind of like, and they think about it for a minute, and they say, it doesn't seem like a really good question. And I said, well, why do you say that? Well, if this isn't something, then what the heck else can it be? So we start thinking about it and say, do an exercise. Ask yourself this question, consider it, and take this away. Say you're not even going to try this one. If you say no to this is something, I mean, are we saying this brings up the concept of absolute nothing? And if you even try and logically think about that, hold information up in your head, everyday thinking, it's almost like your processor, based on logic, seems to stall out to some extent. Now, somebody else said, well, wait a minute. If you have something, maybe it's possible that you could approach this small region in the space, and they could say, look, even the boundary you're looking at is still part of the something, but if you were to go in that region, you'd be in absolute nothing. Well, at least we're now a little bit closer to trying to conceptualize it, but even then it seems to stall out. So then we brought up another question here, and this is what we still don't know. Somebody said, well, the human everyday thinking seems to run on some type of logic, even if it's bad logic. Is there such a thing as an informational processor that runs on something that has nothing to do with logic? And therefore something like absolute nothing could conceivably make more sense to it. But we beat this to death and we all end up saying, I don't see that we're heading in any direction where we can concretely get anywhere, seemingly. So after exhausting that and realizing that there's a lot more to this than just saying, well, it's a ridiculous question. So now we'll say yes, because that doesn't seem to go anywhere. So now we come back to having our head flooded with all these big questions. So now we say, look, what is one of the best questions we could ask? And I'll say right here, I'm sure there's a few other styles of questions you could put here that give you a different chart, but it'll still work out to have similarities. So this is the one I chose. Is there a purpose for this something? Now remember in this chart, if you've considered this and you said yes, this is a given already in your processor. That was a choice you made. Your percent certainty, reasons of your own, chose that one. Is there a purpose for this something? So we're going to go down this route first. If you say yes to this, the next question popping up is, okay, was this the purpose of a conscious thing? People say, well, why do you say that? Well, a lot of people in the group have said, as soon as you say, is there a purpose, there's that smell of intent. And it's very hard to imagine this question without having something conscious automatically showing up. So what is your answer to this question, which would be next? If you say yes, there's got to be a purpose to this something. Well, interestingly enough, if you attempt to say no to this one, was this the purpose of a conscious thing? Again, whatever happened up there seems to almost happen again, where you think, is it even possible to logically think of a purpose to exist without a conscious thing to attach it to? So to some extent, and this isn't nailed down, but you really think this seems very muddled and clunky. So if I was to go back, reconsider the question and say, look, let's say yes, it's from a conscious thing. Well, then the next obvious one is this going to be a godlike entity? So that's the next question. So if you say yes, it has to be the purpose of a conscious thing, and you go down this path, was it a godlike entity? This is important because the terminology of godlike is, it's like a single supreme thing that sits sort of at the top. It knows all, always was, always will be. If I say, well, what if it was not a god for whatever reason? Well, then you run into this box that says, okay, if it's not godlike, well then, just like a science fiction story, you could imagine, okay, well that'd be not unlike us if we found the ability to make a new universe or a mini universe. If we did that, and we learned enough about it that we were going to use that mini universe for a purpose of our own, well that ends up being us having a purpose for that, right? And anything that was inside it could think of it that way. And this mini arrow means even this could sort of feed in to this question, just like if it was God, arguably. So you end up here. Do I know what this purpose is? Because I've already said there must be one, or my part in it. If you say, yes, I do, then this is one of the boxes that's easiest to see, just like a data set or an information package that your logical everyday thinking sort of uses to help make choices in everyday life. You don't have to know the exact purpose, but maybe just a part in it. So you might just work ahead to achieve what you think that purpose is. So what if you go back though? What if you were someone that said, no, I don't know this? So the next box says, should I try to find it or receive this purpose? So where does that take us? What's your answers to this? What choices have you made when thinking it? If you say no, then you're right back to a scenario where you're going to say, should I continue or not? If you say no, then it's the classic, well, maybe I'll terminate, shut down. What I didn't mention about this, and this is interesting, I think, remember that this chart is about your everyday logical thinking mode. It's not in complete isolation of the total conscious package. So what often happens in situations like this, you can envision two things here. Did you logically make a choice that you're just fed up and you're not going to do it anymore? Or in the pot, do emotions and instincts overpower making the decision? So you could see how the termination could take place for emotional instability reasons from the total consciousness? Or was it associated with the logical thinking, everyday sense choice? So it's not in total isolation. So you can see how that could change the chart a bit if we fix it up or make it better. If you say, yes, I'm going to continue, many people who've already accepted this and said, I'm not going to try to find out what this purpose is. I'm just okay living as is. I actually know people who are like this. They say, I believe in God. There's a purpose. I don't know it, but I'm perfectly comfortable and stable living the way I am. So that's an acceptable sort of spot you could end up ending up. If you try to find it, receive its purpose, you work in some way to carry that out. So that's another box you can end up in. So we'll try and get through this. Let's go back up to what arguably is the more interesting side, only because I don't think it's quite as common. Maybe it is, and I just don't know. So let's say, is there a purpose for the something? Let's say you say no. The instant you do that, and it's funny how the instant you do that, because this word has so much association with an intent, and it's very hard to separate that from some type of conscious being. If you say no to this, this is just one of the most likely scenarios where, is God existing or not? I didn't put it in on purpose so I didn't make the chart too big. You could add it if you want, but it seems likely that this almost says, if I don't believe in a purpose, I likely don't believe in a God either. If that's the case, right away, should I continue? If you say no, you might terminate, shut down, and this, of course, just points out we don't even know for sure what afterlife has, if anything at all, whether there's God or not. But the point is we could end up there. If you say, yes, I'll continue, how am I going to do it? And it's funny how, at that point, we've essentially, for whatever reason, said no to a universal purpose. But we might end up here, if I choose to continue, well, why don't I create or find my own purpose? So this is more of my own personal purpose, not that I'm saying the one I come up with is the universal one. So what can we do from there? Try and get all that in. If we say no, and again, this isn't complete, but you can see where you end up. Some of them can actually enter some instability, whether it's how they're trying to think logically or whether emotions creep in. And on this path, once you've said, no, I'm not creating a purpose, you might terminate, shut down. I know some people that actually arguably say they continue getting by, but they feel very unstable. They think unstable. But for whatever reason, they did not opt to do this one. And many of them, people I know, say this is essentially what it describes them. And that's the way they are at the moment. But these are all double-arrowed, meaning it's possible sometimes people can go back up and reconsider these to change the direction of where they're at. At this point, instead of becoming unstable, some could say, I'm perfectly stable just the way I am. I don't believe in a purpose, not necessarily a God. I'm not even going to try and find my own purpose. I'm just going to continue living and existing the way I am. So that box has a little bit of similarity with the one that was over here. I'm just okay as is. If you say, yes, I want to create my own purpose, well then obviously there's two extremes, so to speak, I've looked at. There could be more. Create one and stick to it, which means you create a purpose and you stick to it as if it is truth. So it's not really going to change too much. On the other extreme, you could say, I've come up with a purpose and I'm going to actively continue learning as much as I can. And really, the point is, it's subject to change. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just do a couple of examples here to point out something. I'll shrink it back out and we'll be ready. Got to make it fit. I know it's not pretty. Two things I wanted to point out just to start introducing you to how you can start thinking about this chart. If you're 1950, if I was born in 1950, and I had stable family, friends, community, school, and a local church we went to once a week, no big catastrophes. If I'm coming into the world and I'm essentially given this data set or information package, the God they believe in, the types of things that are right and wrong, and as I grow up and start getting more information downloaded and I experience things, I start noticing, arguably, well, a lot of what they do and how they live seems stable and it makes a lot of sense. And there's a certain comfort associated with it. Some people could accept the information package, this one. So think about that. if I was to accept it and all about my total consciousness likes the package, if I knew this chart existed, even though I myself have no memories of going through it, I receive this. This is how I have been running. What that says to me, according to this chart, is, well, you obviously, to get here, must have said yes. You believe in a God, you believe he has a purpose, and you believe this is something. So it almost as if, without you ever considering this, your everyday thinking processor runs with this package. And that's what you are. It doesn't make it right or wrong. So many people aren't even aware, like when you ask them a question. It's one of these questions. I've met people who started out this way, and they're 20, 25. They've said to me, you know what, I've honestly never actually thought of that question. So it adds a little proof to the point that this sort of gets solidified without ever considering it. But you do have the option, and some people do, they head back this way and they can make different choices. The other example I wanted to give to you is where how I came up with the chart. I wasn't even aware this existed. Born Catholic, my friends, my family, very stable, they were great people, and that is actually part of what contributed to me thinking there was something wrong with me, quite frankly. It's only now that I look back and it's so clear. Somewhere in my head, in the settings, it's like I came out of the box. I was set to having said no. Not that I recall ever asking it. I ran like my answer to this question was no, all through. So think about what that means. And this is where I ended up a lot in my 15s and 20s. There's no purpose for this. So that's when by the time you get to 15, and I always wanted to consider questions like this. So it's not like somebody who felt so comfortable with receiving this information package where this was solidified. I didn't have that. So if you come out of the box and you're functioning as a logical processor right over here, this is what is more immediate to you. So when you're 15 and 20, and I couldn't buy it. Now what made it worse for me was I had so much respect for all these people and it was so stable, I came to the conclusion, look, there's got to be something wrong with me. Because they're so stable, it makes so much sense, it just doesn't add up. It's got to be wrong with me. So I have considered things like this, but the choice for me when it came down to it was, look, I'm going to die one day anyway, so why don't I ride this out and see what I can learn about whatever the hell this actually is. And in terms of my own purpose, it was essentially related to this box. So by the time I was 25, I can say when I finally found this box, it became that much more stable, and I never had any problems, never had to worry about this. And I was quite at peace with the fact that, and I'll say one other thing, this whole mapping of arguably where everyday thinking of any human could ultimately reside, and this is the stuff they could consider should they choose to reconsider, all of this for me rested on one piece of information, and that is absolute uncertainty. At the same time period, all of this seemed to be in front of me, and it rested on a fact that arguably, even the Pope himself or the infallible things that they have written down, and I did talk to some people about this, they said technically, Mike, there is a difference between absolute knowledge that I possess versus a choice of faith. There is a subtle difference because number one, we are not God, and only God actually knows with absolute certainty anything. So just like in quantum mechanics, it's interesting how if a processor that has all of this in access, they see it in front of it, if it resides on uncertainty, then what happens to me is when I finally did start to experience some of this, almost like superposition uncertainty, you can actually function and process in a box like this one and even like this one at the same time. Because it's all based on the fact that I'm not 100% certain about anything. So the possibility that arguably a God could exist and all this stuff could be true is still left open and in play. So it's a very interesting look at how things could run. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this one off right here, and hopefully the next round of the presentations will shift gears to a slightly different topic. So thank you. First of all, is the overall presentation reasonably digestible?
Yes.
Can you where do you guys, if you're as an exercise, where do you find your data set or information package most closely related to in the yellow boxes?
I'd say my box would be the far right one that you were talking about, that one mixed in with the first right one there, right over there. In between those two, that's where I'm at. Because I grew up in a completely Christian family.
Right.
And then when I came into my 15s or so, that's when I became the no question, started looking on my own for things. And the uncertainty thing is the big thing with me. I can't fully deny a God, but I can't fully accept some things that religion and some belief systems throw out on the table as well.
So you're absolutely not saying there's no God.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's exactly where. I don't know, Adam. What about yourself? Anything you relate to in this?
Well, I'm from the square in the middle box that you pointed at earlier.
This one?
Yeah.
But growing up, when did you start considering some of these things? Because I know you have.
I don't really know when. I feel like I just, as far back as I can remember, I've always at least considered them. But then my dad always pushed that you question things, and
Right.
that's just kind of the environment I grew up in. My dad never told me anything really in terms of what the answers to those questions are. Right.
Right.
So that was kind of.
Well, actually for you guys, when you got to that 15 to 20 age group, the friends that you had at the time, did any of them, whether you're out hanging out one night, how often did some of your friends start hinting at some of these types of things, considering them? Or was it mainly you guys a little bit more of the
In a certain
few?
group, there was a lot of philosophical discussion.
Was there other groups that didn't like it?
Most certainly. There were groups that just didn't even consider it.
Okay.
That was the group I hung out with. They didn't consider anything like this at all, kind of thing. They
Did-
just were living life.
When they found out a little more about you, did they think you were kind of strange at some point?
Yeah, a little bit, but then that just became me, and that was just me part of the group, and we never really discussed anything. So I always found myself looking for these questions by myself, you know what I mean, and
Hey.
on my own kind of thing. No one really to discuss these things with, so it's a little difficult. But
Did you guys have any friends that were much more confident in a particular tighter data set package like that one?
yeah,
How did many of them interact with you if you started answering or asking some of these questions?
basically, like if you deny anything that is in the data package, essentially they go on the defense and then just throw the package up in the air, and it's like this is God, you know what I mean? And this is
Now let me ask you this though.
yeah.
When I was 15, when that happened for me, I have to admit I would get agitated. But when I see this in front of me, and it seems to make more sense, I have to admit I don't feel agitated because I realize that I could have just as easily been in this box, and that could be me, or somebody that actually does something like this, because I brushed with that quite a bit. So it's weird how now, when this is in front of me, I have very little emotional overflow onto it. Now that I see this in front of me, it's like it's so amazing when I'm raising my own kids, when they go through these phases. It's all of these ideas everybody seems to know, but once it's in a little chart like this and you hold it in your head in front of you, I don't know if you guys kind of feel that way. Does this help in any way clarify some of the places people can be?
Makes great sense to me. This chart really, after you explained it a lot, it helped put into perspective where people end up with their life and their systems of belief as well.
And this is only new, so this is really ugly. So I don't know, Barry, what do you think?
I like what you've done. I think it's great. Good layout of where we are. But I'll tell you, I'm in the box on the far right. I have a question now.
Yeah.
When you talk about the data information package that you get from brought up in 1950 parents in a farm community in that area, if this information package is simply information, if it's something that a set of beliefs, I can see that would be severely shaken and tested, and I can see the whole process. And I went through some searching too in
Right.
my teen years, but I'm in the far right because I've experienced God in empirical ways, and I've experienced Satan in empirical ways.
Right.
These are not philosophical questions; they are realities in as much as other things.
Right.
I've seen people healed in prayer instantaneously. I've seen darkness, and for me, it's not philosophical. I know it exists. And So
Right.
You don't even have to go over there. And, so
See, this is good though, because my next question I think is tied to this. This is what I'm saying. Like for us, I'm sensing it's different. When all of this resides on this, it's almost as if, to me, how you know God, it's almost as if that's how the only piece of information I know is uncertainty. Meaning for me, it's like I just know I can't know anything in an absolute sense. So it's funny how when all of this processor runs on that uncertainty principle, it's almost like large parts of the whole chart are fair game. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying how it's interesting how it's almost like if my absolute knowledge arguably is uncertainty and yours is knowing God, it's an interesting, I'm just throwing it on the table.
I'm just saying, I'm not sure when you say the information package, if it's just information, if it's just a belief system, I can see that all of this would follow. And
Oh.
with secular
Sorry.
teaching about evolution, which I don't
Yep.
believe in.
No, I like what you're saying.
I think there's no evidence for it.
Yeah.
And don't have to believe me, believe the evolutionists, there simply is no evidence in the fossil record for intransitional forms.
Right.
So you can make all this stuff up and
Yep.
brainwash people to believe it. But so if it's informational, you can go all these places.
Yep.
I'm just saying if it's
No, I like this.
empirical, then I don't have to go to the other places. I believe.
No, this is, I think I got this now. Will you tell me? Hold on, the hamster's working. No.
By working faster than them.
So this model, it's just a rough model. I originally started out with how it would be a flow chart for some logical processing system. So quite frankly, this is, and notice how I said, this is mapping out only a piece of the human total consciousness. And the piece I'm trying to map out is what arguably seems to be the most logical processor piece, but there's a whole lot more to being human.
Sure.
So do you see what I'm saying? This map is sort of contained to when you logically try to think through things and consider. So yes, in that sense, anything can arguably be received and thought of logically, processor style, the way I'm referring to with the data set. But we can't forget how I've said, I think we all agree, there's a whole other package, where we got it from, I don't know, but the subconscious feelings, emotions, and instinct that we know damn well can contribute to the next outcomes.
Yeah, but even, if I may,
Yep.
if we're talking about information.
Yep.
Information can be communication, like
Yep.
with your parents, but it can be something that you derive from what you do and you see.
Yep.
So I'm saying that what I've experienced is in this realm of information. It doesn't
Right.
have to be something that I can't know to believe.
Right.
I can believe it because I know it, and as much as I know that I know how a car works, or I know
Correct.
how a motor works, or because I believe it, but I've experienced it. I isn't just God. I have, God. Who's God? I haven't met him, so
Right.
that's up here in the faith realm. But I'm saying there's information available that leads me
Right.
inside of that, which isn't part of the subconscious or the emotion. These other areas that you list.
And what is that part of then?
Well, I'm just saying, I think there's information that falls within this scope that you're describing, that's empirical, that for me negates the other possibilities.
Okay, so but what that means is,
If I didn't know that, if I didn't know God, if I hadn't experienced His presence,
Yep.
or the other side, which I experienced, then I'd be like in this situation, well, I don't know, it could be, or maybe I'll investigate, maybe who cares, then I can see all that.
so it's almost like you have a piece of absolute truthful knowledge.
Well, from experience, it could be.
Right. No.
Arguably from memory in the on the state of consciousness, it's knowledge overrides from your memory that your decision-making process have access to, right? Forms the basis of all your decisions.
Yeah, but it's certainly in the realm of my conscious. What would you call it? My current consciousness.
Yeah, your everyday type, I know what I'm thinking consciousness. Yeah.
Whether you agree or not, it makes sense.
Well, Barry, I know, I definitely appreciate that.
So it's good to have people at different points in the scale.
And it's just the thing I'm still getting used to, and this is what Other people like Jeff, he has very much so here. But what's interesting is when you enter into conversation about any topic, he's the only one I've ever met who clear as day is in this box in terms of what he believes and runs on. But when he's in consideration mode of any topic under the sun, it's astounding at how this is almost as if he never brings it in play at all. And he has the ability to, it's almost like what you said, it's almost like he can leave whatever space that is and discuss informationally, but then he almost seamlessly can go back to being that and confident. I'm not saying it's right, but it's very interesting how you can have people who are very much, and they'll tell you absolutely, this is absolutely where I am and ultimately reside on. But in a consideration mode.
I don't know Jeff's, life. All I'm saying is, for me, it's more than philosophical. It's more than a rational decision. It's an
Right.
experiential choice. I've seen it, felt it, tasted it. So I know it's real. In as much as I know you're standing here.
And maybe that's why he partially did say the total consciousness has to have at least, so maybe he's putting it residing there. A spiritual peace is in the rest of your consciousness for him, right?